As you guys know, Palantir has been working in close cooperation with the UK's NHS, National Health Service. They've done a bunch of work, and it's apparently helped with the vaccine rollout, very much so in the UK. But openDemocracy is now suing the UK government over this project. What's the deal? What's going on with this? How should we, as investors of Palantir, look at this going forward? Is it anything to fear? Today we're going to talk about that. Welcome back to the channel, family. My name is Trey, getting in touch with you from Japan. I want to hear your opinion if you live in the UK. How has the vaccine rollout been going? I don't know that much because I don't live there. And I'd be really interested to hear if, like my family live mostly in California, but I have friends all over the US and around the world. But it sounds like in America it's not going that smoothly. It sounds like they could use a little bit of Palantir in their vaccine rollout. So I'm really interested to hear how it's going in the UK, especially from you guys. But today we're going to be looking at this lawsuit. openDemocracy appears to be a news, opinion, political-based website that aims to keep democratic debate alive across the world. Keep in mind that the phrase democratic debate can mean different things to different people in different countries. openDemocracy is supported by many different individuals as well as organizations. They claim that they fight for democracy and transparency, especially in government and things like that. And so you can see actually who supports them, who their backers are, individuals and organizations. I've mentioned George Soros a few times in these Palantir videos, who is a huge stockholder of Palantir, but in more recent months has started talking down on Palantir as a potential threat to democracy and freedom. One of Soros's groups, the Open Society Foundation, also supports openDemocracy as well. In their fourth quarter presentation, Palantir showed some slides talking about their partnership with the UK's national health system. Here is one of those slides where they're congratulating the UK for its speedy and effective vaccination rollout. And another slide going into a bit more detail, Palantir shared that this deal has been a $31 million partnership where Palantir has helped the NHS order, allocate, track, and deliver vaccines through their Foundry platform. And again, very much would love to hear your opinion or your thoughts on this if you live in the UK. So this lawsuit is in response to the way this rollout has been handled. So here's openDemocracy's claim and their concerns. On the front of their website, it says, "Save our NHS data. The UK government has snuck through a massive £23 million NHS data deal with a controversial spy tech firm, Palantir. It gives the CIA-backed firm, whose spyware has been accused of creating racist feedback loops, a major long-term role in handling our personal health information and in England's cherished NHS. We believe that we, the public, should have a say about these lucrative deals before they happen, not after. That's why we're bringing an urgent legal challenge demanding public consultation on this massive deal. To do this, we need to raise £30,000. We must act now to stop government secrecy around these massive deals and to make sure our personal health information and privacy rights are protected. COVID cronyism and secrecy must end." So openDemocracy's concern is primarily with the way this data is being handled and being outsourced to a bunch of different foreign companies especially. It's interesting that they label Palantir primarily as a controversial tech spy firm whose spyware does different things. I guess they're ignoring the fact that they're almost half of their revenue now comes from the commercial sector as well. So initially this emergency deal with the NHS and these different organizations was meant to be like an emergency stopgap measure. So they're like, hey, the whole country is dying because of this pandemic. We need to figure out solutions like now. And I guess it was supposed to be a short-term measure, and then immediately once it was over, Palantir was supposed to erase all of this data and completely let go of all this data and just move on. But what happened in the shadows was that the UK government, without properly consulting, without using the proper avenues to consult the public, went on and extended this deal for 2 more years. So it's a little bit debatable. We don't really know the exact contents of this deal and where this data is going. But the complaint primarily is that, hey, government, there are rules in place that say you're supposed to consult with the public. Government sources also mentioned unprecedented amounts of data flowing out to companies involved with the deal like Palantir, Microsoft, Google, and a few others. So in April and May of 2020, Foxglove and openDemocracy ended up requesting publication of the details of the agreements, and the response never came, so they decided it was time to sue. Under the Freedom of Information Act in the UK, data protection impact assessments are something you request when the government is making deals like these. But it turns out on March 28th, a blog announced this new 2-year extension of the contract, which is not really consultation. It's just kind of like quietly saying, hey guys, we're just going to continue with this. And that upset a lot of people who are worried about their privacy going out to foreign organizations. In these next slides here, openDemocracy goes on to talk about why they're concerned about Palantir in particular, especially their leadership from one of the co-founders, Peter Thiel. We do know some things. Palantir, founded by Silicon Valley billionaire and close Trump ally Peter Thiel, is a data mining firm best known for supporting the CIA's counterinsurgency and intelligence operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. So they're correct on that. Palantir has been really key in dealing with military scenarios. It's really crazy. I was watching a video where they have basically these blimps that have loads of cameras on them watching all over the place. And if a human was to sit down and watch all of those feeds one by one, it would take them years to be able to catch up and process all that data. But Palantir systems basically monitor all of it, figure out patterns, and figure out that guy might be planting mines or planting bombs. That guy who always wears the pink hat at 8 a.m. every morning and goes out for a walk. Like things like that, as well as just in general being able to monitor huge amounts of data that humans can't really handle. And so Palantir does have really close relationships with the military and many different governments, but they're clear that they only work with allies. They go on to complain in 2019, it was criticized for its support for U.S. immigration and customs enforcement's brutal regime of deportations. This is debatable depending on how you look at the situation. I'll get more into that in a minute. They go on to take a little snippet from one of Peter Thiel's essays, which I'll link to down below in the description if you're interested in reading the whole thing. Peter Thiel wrote this essay called The Education of a Libertarian, where he explains his own development and his own journey. And one of the things he mentions in there is that I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible. And openDemocracy looked at that and is just kind of like, oh my gosh, this is terrifying. These guys can't be trusted. And openDemocracy also said that Palantir and the NHS leadership were basically schmoozing behind the scenes and, you know, taking them out for drinks and giving them gifts. And that's why this contract was awarded to Palantir. That is also how sales works, unfortunately, in the world. And a lot of times when you are a company trying to sell a product, you know, dude, my product is going to help your company so hard. It's going to be so dope for you guys. You're going to save a lot of money. You're going to be more efficient. You're going to make a lot of money, whatever it is. But unless you're good at sales, companies just don't care. They're too busy to care. They're too busy to hear you. And so, yeah, probably this happened. They took people out for drinks and they said, hey, you know, let us help you guys. And that's how they got the deal. So are there validity to these claims? Do we need to be like worried about our freedom? Do we need to be worried about our privacy when looking at Palantir? I wanted to take a look at a couple of clips from Alex Karp, the CEO of the company. In these clips, he addresses a lot of these concerns. And in the final clip, I think, is how he would answer if somebody came up to him right now and said, hey, what do you think about this lawsuit?
It doesn't own data. It's not in the business of sharing data, but it is in the business of analyzing big data. And maybe you could just explain to us what this technology that Palantir applies to data is all about. When somebody retains Palantir, becomes one of your customers, what are they buying from Palantir?
Well, they're what they're buying, and there's what they're buying and what they're getting. What they're in the end buying is a result based on their data, so that they can make a decision, not that we can make a decision. And how they make the decision comes down to their level of technical acuity. Some people use ML at the final mile. Some people use data analytics. But what they're actually buying is a platform built years before it was needed that would allow you to replace, or in some cases replace parts of your platform that you would need to answer seemingly simple questions. So as an example, if you have hundreds and hundreds of data sets and you have to ask a simple question of how many people can fit into this hospital in this neighborhood, you've got to integrate all those data sets before you can ask and answer that question. And then you have to have a series of software products. And you may have 3 of the software products, but you don't have 14 of them. And so what Palantir does is we essentially collapse the time needed from the time you realize that your infrastructure is not working to the time you can ask and answer the question. And we did that by essentially predicting that times before 5 or 6 years out before we built the product would be very different than when we built the product. And so our product is used to maintain airplanes to help people drill for oil and gas in the national security context. It powers most of the police intelligence work in Europe, and because of its data protection. But what you're really getting is an ability to replace or augment the software products you have overnight or within the context of a couple weeks, so that you can ask and answer questions in a critical context, either in the commercial or the government context. And that's how we ended up being the engine behind most anti-terror institutions in the West, a number of the largest economic institutions in the West, and why Palantir is in 35 countries helping to mitigate the disaster incurred in the wake of the COVID pandemic.
So this is Alex Karp explaining what Palantir does, why they need access to all of this information, and how it's going to help everybody going forward into the future. I should also mention that Palantir is also very good about, like, they're not taking all of this information from their clients, commercial or government or military and otherwise, and doing stuff with it. They're going in and a lot of times sending their staff into these companies, helping them figure out how to analyze their own data and then bouncing. Like, they don't need to be like, we're going to take all this data and sell it on Google or something like that. That's not their business model.
Development of vaccines, we're all just extraordinarily pleased by how fast that happened. But as we look at the distribution process seeming to break down, we throw up our hands again. What would Palantir be able to do to help HHS in this period going forward, distributing vaccines, getting the country healthy again, preparing for the next pandemic?
Well, Palantir is involved globally in, and the two places we're most prominently involved are the US, UK, but a number of other countries, in allowing people who are doing the planning to understand exactly what's happening on the ground, distribute PPE. So, for example, which hospitals are overutilized, which hospitals have capacity, which hospitals need PPE, which ones have too much, which ones have too little. And then on vaccine distribution, most notably in the US and the UK. The Operation Warp Speed, which uses Tiberius, is built on top of Foundry, uses...
Foundry is your basic Palantir infrastructure, so our viewers will understand that.
Sorry. What Foundry allows them to see and decide is it's essentially a dashboard unifying the hundreds of data sets that make up the production of vaccines, the distribution of vaccines up to the state level. So how many vaccines are produced, how many can be shipped, and where do they go? The central issue in America, less so in England because they have a centralized healthcare system, is the delta between vaccines that are delivered to the state and the actual doses that arrive in people's arms. And so we have a serious issue with that in America, as is, I think, commonly known and was discussed by your guest yesterday, that there's roughly a 12 million delta between the vaccines, so roughly 17 million vaccines delivered to states, roughly 5.4 administered. Palantir brings those vaccines to the states, and then there's a question as what we as a society can do to resolve that problem. Now, one of the things that makes America particularly interesting, complicated, and great is that states have a lot of rights, and they use local ways of distributing. Each one has a different infrastructure. What I'm hopeful will happen, especially once we get past this incredibly discouraging and depressive events of the last couple of days, is the new administration will also be in a position to have better discourse with states. States will begin to develop best practices. That's what software could do, and what we obviously be willing to do is to help them administer the policies they develop more accurately, quicker. One of the things that's super interesting about software is it allows you to compress time. So, what should not be possible distributing, we need to get roughly 300 million vaccines to America to hit herd immunity, is something that will only happen if we unify as a country and we use the best technology, especially software available, because the amount of vaccine per day is just surpasses what we would normally be doing as a country. The British distribution has certain attributes we don't have because they're just more centralized. But But in any case, what we're doing is providing a dashboard so that every single person involved in Operation Warp Speed can actually track distribution, how much is being produced, where is it going, and if there's any disruptions between manufacturing and final handoff to the state.
So he's talking about how Palantir uses this data to optimize the workflow. And when you're dealing with really, really huge systems that are like tens of thousands of employees, many different systems in many different regions, and in the UK's case, you're dealing with like numerous countries in the United Kingdom, you know, Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and England. So there are all different kinds of systems going on, and no human or no small team of humans can go in and figure out the right way to optimize how to solve these problems. But these systems, Foundry and things like that, that Palantir have made, are designed to be able to take all of this information and put it together in a way that a human decision maker can say, oh, this is the way we should go forward, in a way that's going to save a lot of lives. This next clip, I think, is how he would respond in particular to this lawsuit.
Another super hard thing that we have to look at is we do not want to pretend or obviously attempt to change the basic way in which we live in order to get pandemics under control. And that makes vaccines even more important, because if you're going to expand civil liberties and fight pandemics, you're going to have to do that with vaccine and increase legitimacy. Software, the way in which vaccines are developed, and honestly, more credible political leadership can actually make a huge difference in that problem. But you really need all three, because if the vaccine is delivered too slowly, then you have compounding math working against you. If the vaccine is delivered on time, but people don't believe they will take it, you can't get to herd immunity. And then in democracies, we need to convince people, not force people. And so those, by the way, the element of obviously what analytics, data integration, ML, AI will play a role in that whole chain. But they play a role primarily in two ways. One, acceleration of time, and two, creating transparency. By the way, transparency is a specialized issue, specialized concept in software, because you both create transparency of what's happening in the data, but you can anonymize the people involved in acquiring the data. And so that's obviously necessary in correspondence with our generally held civil liberties.
And again, I'm going to be linking this interview down below if you want to check out the full thing. But basically, what we have to think about as humans right now in the world is like a lot of really, really hairy questions. I mentioned in the last video yesterday about how we as humans live in a Twitter world, and we've trained our brains to be like, hey, here are 3 steps how to get rich. Here are 5 steps how to get married to a beautiful woman and have a happy life. Like, nothing is that simple, unfortunately. In a video I did recently, click up here if you want to check it out, I've talked about my concerns with Chinese stocks and the way the Chinese stock market works, especially for us as Americans who are investing in Chinese stocks. My concerns with that. And most Westerners look at China, they think of like the Uyghur stuff going on in Western China. They think about a lot of the injustice or human rights issues going on, or pollution or things like that. But the reality is, if you're one of the billion plus Chinese people, most likely the way the Chinese government has been doing things has brought you out of poverty into like a much nicer situation than it would have been 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. And so it's really, really hard to say everything they do is 100% evil. Don't take this the wrong way. I'm not saying like China is the best way to do things, but there are hundreds of millions of people who would say, because of the way China does things, my life is better than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And you can't really debate with that. And so there's always 2 sides to the story, or more than 2 sides to the story. And so when we're looking at this lawsuit, so when we're thinking about big issues like this, of course privacy is a big deal. Anytime there is a data breach, like everybody is like, oh my gosh, I used that service. I hope my data wasn't compromised. I hope my social security number isn't in the hands of terrorists or something like that. So privacy needs to be taken really seriously. And I think when we look at companies like Google or Facebook, there are ways where we've seen our information has been used in ways that is like actually uncomfortable. And a lot of people are quitting using Facebook because of that. Palantir is a little bit different. They're not using the information to sell us more stuff. They're not using the information to sell to other people to make money as their business model. like some of these other companies do. And they're very clear on having high privacy standards as well. Secondly, I wanted to mention kind of the other side of the coin. When you're rushing in to solve an international pandemic and hundreds of thousands of people are dying, should we just say, oh, there are privacy concerns, never mind, let's not have a smooth rollout of the vaccine? You know that even just vaccinating a few people can stop the spread to hundreds and maybe even save some lives. They say that once we get herd immunity, once 80% of the people are vaccinated or have built up the immune system to be able to handle this virus, then basically the spread of it comes to a halt. And so is it worth it to lose like a little bit of privacy, some of your health information and records and where you live and stuff like that, to be able to save potentially hundreds or thousands or millions of lives going into the future? You got to ask these questions when you're dealing with privacy. And it's not so simple as saying, hey, you're not allowed to give any of our information to anybody. And thirdly, I wanted to address the complaints that openDemocracy had against Palantir. They talked about it was supporting Trump's brutal regime against immigration. It also talked about how the AI did racist profiling in some police cases in different places in the world. And Palantir does power many police forces, many military forces, including in Europe, in various countries as well. And it's true that AI tends, not just Palantir's AI, but many different companies have done experiments where they send AI onto the internet and then all of a sudden the AI becomes very anti-Semitic because that's what is on the internet. That's what's going on in the world, and that's how AI works. That's why humans need to be involved with the process. But that's also, on the other hand, why people like Elon Musk are saying, guys, we don't know what we're getting into with AI and we need to be very cautious. And so I think Palantir is very clear about how they use these tools to provide growth and provide improvement, but they're also clear on the fact that humans need to be involved with the process. They're not just taking all the stuff, sending it to AI and being like, okay, the problem's solved, guys. That it doesn't work that simply. And when it comes to immigration, there are good people on the side who say we should have our borders open and anybody should be able to come into whatever country we're in to be able to have the benefits of whatever country we're in. And there are other good people on the other side of the argument who say, hey guys, we need to protect our borders because all of a sudden if we get millions or hundreds of millions of people coming into our country, the whole thing's gonna fall apart. Nothing will work right. Hospitals will be overwhelmed. A bunch of people aren't gonna be paying taxes. Insurance issues will fall apart. Like, everything gets jacked, And so there are good people on both sides of the argument. It's not just a matter of saying Trump has brutal policies about building a wall on the Mexican border and Palantir helped that. Therefore, Palantir is evil. Therefore, we should sue them. Like, it's not really that simple. And so when you're dealing with a company like Palantir who says, we are for democracy, we are for privacy, we want to help strengthen democracy and the Western world, but we also work for our clients and their ideals. This is stuff that's going to be popping up very frequently. And that is, again, why I think we need to have a really long-term perspective on this stock, 3, 5, 8, 10 years, if you're going to be an investor, as the management has told us to have. But going back to the lawsuit and Palantir in specific, I don't think Palantir is going to be affected by this. I think the agreement with the NHS is going to continue to move forward. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts. Those of you who are more familiar with openDemocracy or the UK's NHS system, let me know what you think. Like, I'm not a pro on these things, so I want to learn from your opinions, your experiences. Thank you guys very much for your time. Hope this video was helpful for you. Love you guys and have a great one.